She tried to pour the coffee, but her hand trembled so violently that the pot shattered against the ceramic mug. The sound silenced the entire diner. But it wasn't the spill that made his blood run cold. It was the fact that she didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She just stared at her swollen, purple bruised wrist with a look of pure, terrified resignation. His name is Robert Sterling. He owns this restaurant chain, but nobody here knows his face. He came undercover to find out why this location was losing money. Instead, he found a waitress working with a broken hand, a manager with a dark secret, and a conspiracy that would force him to risk his own life to save hers. You think you know how undercover boss stories end? Trust me, you are not ready for what he found in the kitchen. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. Robert Sterling pulled the collar of his stained, oversized army jacket up around his neck, shielding his face from the biting wind. 2 blocks away, his Aston Martin was parked safely in a private garage, gleaming and warm. But here, on the corner of 4th and Pine, Robert was just another shadow in the downpour. He was Ray, a drifting construction worker looking for a hot meal. At 42, Robert was the CEO of Sterling Hospitality, a conglomerate that owned 45 luxury hotels and over 200 mid-range diners across the Pacific Northwest. He was known in the boardrooms for his ruthless efficiency and his obsession with the bottom line. But lately, the numbers at the Midnight Griddle, branch 9402, weren't just bad. They were suspicious. Inventory was vanishing. Staff turnover was at 300%, and the customer reviews were horrific. He pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner. The bell overhead gave a weak, pathetic jingle. The smell hit him first, not the comforting aroma of bacon and coffee, but the stale, sour stench of old grease and damp carpet. The lighting was dim, a few fluorescent bulbs flickering with an impending seizure. It was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the place should have been bustling. Instead, only 3 booths were occupied. Robert shuffled to a booth in the back, keeping his head down. He wiped the rain from his face with a rough hand, instantly regretting it, as his fingers grazed the sticky surface of the table. "Be with you in a second," a voice called out. It was breathless, strained. Robert looked up. Emerging from the kitchen was a woman who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was petite, perhaps in her early 30s, with hair the color of dried wheat pulled back in a messy bun. Her name tag, crooked and smudged, read Sarah. She was balancing a tray with 3 heavy plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Robert watched with the hawk-like intensity that had made him a billionaire. He noticed the details others missed. He saw the sheen of cold sweat on her upper lip, despite the diner being drafty. He saw the way she bit her lower lip, turning it white. But then he saw the hand. Her left hand, the one supporting the heavy side of the tray, was wrapped in a crude, skin-colored bandage that disappeared into the sleeve of her uniform. It wasn't a medical cast. It looked like a desperate, homemade job, layers of pharmacy gauze wrapped too tight. As she lowered the tray to a table of 2 burly truckers, her left wrist gave a microscopic jerk. Clang! A fork slid off the plate and hit the floor. "Damn it, Sarah," one of the truckers laughed, though not unkindly. "You got the shakes today." "I'm so sorry, Earl," Sarah whispered. Her voice was a jagged edge. "Let me get you a fresh one." She bent down to retrieve the fork. Robert stopped breathing. The simple mechanical action of bending and reaching with her left hand caused a reaction that was visceral. Sarah's eyes rolled back slightly, her face draining of all color. A soft, involuntary gasp escaped her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. She didn't just have a sprained wrist, that hand was broken. Badly. She stood up, trembling, clutching the fork against her chest with her right hand, her left arm hanging limp and useless at her side. "Hey!" The shout came from the kitchen pass-through window. It was a bark, distinct and aggressive. A man leaned out. He was thick-necked, wearing a manager's shirt that was straining at the buttons. His face was red, sweaty, and twisted into a scowl. This was Gavin Thorne, the manager Robert had been reading reports about for months. "Quit dropping the silverware and move the tables, Sarah," Gavin bellowed, his voice echoing through the nearly empty room. "Table 4 is waiting on coffee. Move it!" Sarah flinched. It wasn't the flinch of an employee getting yelled at. It was the flinch of a dog that had been kicked too many times. "Yes, Gavin, I'm going," she stammered. She rushed toward the coffee station, favoring her left side, moving with a stiff, unnatural gait. Robert felt a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the heater. He had fired people for incompetence. He had fired people for theft. But watching a manager scream at an injured employee? That was a violation of everything he stood for. He picked up the sticky menu, his knuckles white. He needed to know more. He needed to know why a woman with a broken hand was waiting tables instead of sitting in a hospital waiting room. And more importantly, he needed to know why she was so terrified of the man in the kitchen. Robert kept his face hidden behind the laminated menu as Sarah approached his booth. Up close, the damage was even more apparent. Her eyes were rimmed with red, heavy, dark circles, bruising the skin beneath them. She smelled faintly of antiseptic ointment and old coffee. "Hi," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Midnight Griddle. Can I start you off with some coffee?" "Yeah," Robert said, adopting the gravelly voice he practiced for his persona. "Black and the meatloaf. Coming right up." She turned to leave, but her hip bumped the corner of the table. It was a gentle bump, but she sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth, her left hand instinctively curling into a claw. "You okay, miss?" Robert asked, lowering the menu. Sarah froze. She looked at him, really looked at him, assessing if he was a threat. "I'm fine, sir. Just clumsy. Long shift." "That hand looks hurt," Robert pressed gently. "You see a doctor for that?" Fear flickered in her eyes. It was instant and electric. "It's just a sprain. Carpal tunnel. You know how it is." She hurried away before he could ask another question. Robert watched her go. He took out his phone, concealing it under the table, and opened a secure app. He typed a message to his head of security, a former FBI agent named David. "Run a background check on a Sarah Jenkins, employee at Unit 402. Also, full deep dive on manager Gavin Thorne. Priority 1. Something is wrong here." He slid the phone back into his pocket just as the kitchen door swung open. Gavin Thorne walked out. The manager was an imposing figure, standing 6'2" with grease-slicked hair and eyes that scanned the room like a predator looking for a weak link. He didn't look like a restaurant manager. He looked like a bouncer at a dive bar who enjoyed his job a little too much. Gavin walked right past Robert, barely acknowledging him, and cornered Sarah near the soda fountain. Robert strained his ears. The diner was quiet enough that he could catch snippets of their conversation. "Slow," Gavin hissed. His voice was low, venomous. "You're moving too slow, Sarah." "It hurts, Gavin," Sarah whispered, pleading. "I can't lift the pot. Please, just let me work the register tonight. Just for tonight." Gavin stepped closer to her. He invaded her personal space, pressing her back against the soda machine. To an outside observer, it might look like a performance review. To Robert, it looked like intimidation. "The register?" Gavin let out a short, cruel chuckle. "You think you're smart enough for the cash, Sarah? After the mistake you made last week?" "I didn't make a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "The draw was short before I started." "That's not how I remember it." Gavin said. He reached out and placed his hand on her left shoulder, the side with the injury. He squeezed. Robert saw Sarah's knees buckle. Her face went white. She bit her lips so hard a tiny drop of blood appeared. She didn't scream. She couldn't. "You owe me," Gavin whispered, leaning into her ear. "You owe the company. You work the floor until the debt is paid. Or do I need to make a phone call to your situation?" Sarah shook her head rapidly, tears welling up. No, please don't call. I'll work. I'll move faster. Please, Gavin." "Good girl," he sneered. He patted her injured shoulder, a mock gesture of comfort that was clearly designed to cause pain. "Table 6 needs a refill. Move." Gavin turned and walked back toward the office, a smug grin plastered on his face. Robert sat there, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was extortion. This was abuse. Your situation? What did that mean? Sarah took a moment to compose herself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her good hand, took a deep, shuddering breath, and grabbed the coffee pot. When she came back to Robert's table to pour his coffee, her hand was shaking so badly the dark liquid sloshed over the rim of the mug and splashed onto the table. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, grabbing a napkin. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll clean it up." Robert reached out and gently caught her right wrist, stopping her. "Sarah," he said, dropping the Ray accent. His voice was firm, authoritative, the voice of Robert Sterling. "Leave it." She looked at him, startled by the change in tone. "Sir, sit down," Robert said. I can't. Gavin will see." "Sit down," Robert repeated. He pulled a $100 bill from his pocket and slid it across the wet table. "I'm paying you for 5 minutes of your time. Sit." Sarah looked at the money, then at the kitchen door, then back at Robert. The desperation in her eyes won out. She slid into the booth opposite him, perched on the edge of the seat like a bird ready to take flight. "Who is he to you?" Robert asked quietly. "And don't tell me he's just your manager." Sarah looked down at her broken hand, cradling it in her lap. "You shouldn't be asking questions, mister. You don't know who he is. You don't know who he knows." "Try me," Robert said. "I've dealt with bullies before." Sarah let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Gavin isn't a bully. He's a monster. And he owns me." "Nobody owns anyone," Robert said. "Why don't you quit? Go to the police?" Sarah leaned in, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Because the last girl who tried to go to the police, they found her car in the river," she said. "And because Gavin has my daughter." The world stopped. Robert stared at her. "He has your child?" "Not literally," Sarah said, tears finally spilling over. "But he controls where she lives. He controls my housing. He controls my parole officer. If I lose this job, if I walk out that door, I go back to prison, and my little girl goes into the system. He knows it. And he breaks something new every time I forget it." She lifted her left arm and slowly, painfully, pulled back the sleeve of her uniform. Robert gasped. The skin wasn't just bruised. It was a map of violence. Old yellow bruises, new purple ones, and the wrist. The wrist was bent at an angle that made Robert's stomach churn. "He did this," she whispered. "Because I dropped a plate of fries on his shoes 3 days ago. He slammed my hand in the walk-in freezer door." Robert Sterling had come to check on profit margins. He had come to fix a business. But as he looked at the broken woman across from him, he realized he wasn't there to save a restaurant. He was there to go to war. "Sarah," Robert said, his voice low and dangerous, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're going to serve me my meatloaf. You are going to finish your shift. And then you are going to take me to where you live." "Why?" she asked, shrinking back. "Who are you?" Robert didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the kitchen, where Gavin was watching them through the window, his eyes narrowing. "I'm the guy who's going to burn Gavin Thorne's life to the ground," Robert said. "But first I need you to trust me." The diner closed at 11:04 p.m. Robert waited outside in the pouring rain, the neon open sign finally flickering off, plunging the parking lot into a gloomy darkness. He had moved his Aston Martin 2 blocks over to maintain his cover, leaning against a brick wall, watching the back exit like a sentinel. 10 minutes later, the metal door groaned open. Sarah stepped out, huddled into a thin, threadbare cardigan that offered zero protection against the Seattle chill. She was struggling with a garbage bag, her good arm straining, her broken left hand tucked protectively against her ribs. Behind her, Gavin appeared. He didn't help her. He simply leaned against the doorframe, lighting a cigarette, watching her struggle to heave the bag into the dumpster. "Don't forget tomorrow, Sarah," Gavin called out, the smoke curling around his face. "Inventory is coming. I need you here at 5 a.m. to prep. If you're late, well, you know the drill. I call Miller." Sarah flinched at the name. "I'll be here, Gavin, I promise." "Good." He flicked the cigarette butt at her feet. "Get home to the brat." The heavy door slammed shut, and the deadbolt slid home with a sound like a prison cell closing. Sarah stood there for a moment in the rain, shaking. Then she turned and began to walk towards the bus stop. "Sarah!" She jumped, spinning around, eyes wide with terror. When she saw it was Ray, the construction worker from Booth 4, her shoulders slumped slightly, though she didn't relax. "You startled me," she breathed, clutching her chest. "I told you I wasn't leaving until I knew you were safe," Robert said, stepping out of the shadows. "My truck is around the corner. Let me drive you." "I can't," she said, backing away. "If Gavin sees—" "Gavin is inside counting his money," Robert said firmly. "And look at your hand. It's swelling up, Sarah. You're in no condition to take 3 buses. Please." She hesitated, looking at her throbbing wrist, then at the desolate street. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but just down the block. Don't pull up to the building." They walked in silence to where Robert had parked. He had swapped the Aston Martin for a nondescript Ford rental he kept for these specific inspections, a detail that saved his cover. As she climbed into the passenger seat, the warmth of the heater hit her, and a small, involuntary whimper escaped her lips. "It's bad, isn't it?" Robert asked, pulling into traffic. "I think the bone moved," she whispered, staring out the window. "I can feel it grating when I make a fist." "We are going to a hospital," Robert stated. "No." She turned to him, panic flaring again. "No doctors, no paper trail. Gavin checks my medical records. He says since I'm on parole, any sign of drug-seeking behavior or fighting gets reported to Officer Miller. If I go to the ER with a broken hand, Miller will say I was in a brawl and revoke my parole. I go back to prison for 3 years. I lose Lily forever." Robert gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "Who is Miller?" "Officer Frank Miller," she said bitterly. "My parole officer, and Gavin's high school buddy. They run this whole thing together." Robert felt a cold chill slide down his spine. It was worse than he thought. It wasn't just a rogue manager, it was a systemic entrapment ring. "Where do you live, Sarah?" "The Pines." "On 82nd. Robert frowned. The Pines was a notorious housing project on the edge of the city, known for mold, crime, and absentee landlords. When they pulled up a block away, the reality of Sarah's life hit Robert like a physical blow. The building was a crumbling concrete block. Windows were boarded up with plywood. Trash overflowed onto the sidewalk. "Thank you, Ray," Sarah said, reaching for the door handle with her good hand. "You're a kind man. You shouldn't get mixed up in this." "I'm coming in," Robert said. "You can't— I need to see the living conditions. If I'm going to take these guys down, I need evidence, Sarah. I need to see everything." She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw in his eyes, perhaps the same resolve that had built a billion-dollar empire, made her trust him. "Okay," she whispered, "but be quiet. Lily is sleeping." They entered the building. The hallway smelled of urine and damp rot. They climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Sarah unlocked apartment 3B. It wasn't an apartment. It was a single room. A mattress lay on the floor in one corner. A hot plate sat on a crate. And in the center of the bed, curled up under a thin blanket, was a little girl, no older than 6. She was sleeping fitfully, her forehead glistening with sweat. "Mummy?" the girl mumbled as Sarah entered. "I'm here, baby," Sarah cooed, rushing to the mattress. She knelt, wincing as she jostled her broken hand and stroked the girl's hair. "How are you feeling?" "Thirsty," the girl rasped. Sarah reached for a bottle of water on the floor, but her injured hand gave out. The bottle tumbled. Robert was there in a second, picking it up and handing it to the child. He looked around the room. There was no refrigerator, no real furniture, and taped to the wall was a piece of paper. Robert stepped closer to read it. It was a lease agreement. But the landlord listed wasn't the building owner. It was Thorn Management, LLC. "Sarah," Robert said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "how much rent does Gavin charge you for this?" Sarah didn't look up from her daughter. $1,200 a month. Robert nearly choked. $1,200? This place isn't worth $300. That's nearly your entire paycheck. "That's the point," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "He takes the rent directly out of my check before I even see it. Then he deducts fees for uniform cleaning, broken dishes, attitude adjustments. By the end of the month, I actually owe him money. The debt keeps getting bigger. I can't leave because I can't afford a deposit on a new place, and Miller says if I become homeless, I violate parole." She looked up at Robert, tears streaming down her face. "I'm a slave, Ray. I'm working 70 hours a week to pay a man who breaks my bones, just so I can sleep on a floor with my sick daughter." Robert looked at the little girl, Lily, who was watching him with wide, feverish eyes. He looked at Sarah's purple, swollen hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't care about the cover anymore. He needed his team. "Sarah," Robert said, "pack a bag." "What? Pack a bag? You and Lily are leaving. Tonight. I can't. Miller will—" "Let Miller come," Robert said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I want him to come. I want them all to come." Robert stood by the window of the squalid apartment, guarding the door while Sarah frantically packed a backpack with Lily's few belongings. He had just sent a code red signal to David, his head of security. Within 3 minutes his phone buzzed. "David, tracking your location. I have 2 teams en route. ETA 8 minutes. What is the situation?" "Robert, hostile extraction. 1 adult female, 1 female child. Medical emergency. I need a trauma surgeon on standby at the safe house. And David, bring the dossier on Gavin Thorne and a parole officer named Frank Miller." "David, copy that. We are coming in hot." Robert slid the phone away. He turned to Sarah. "We have 8 minutes. Put on whatever warm clothes you have." "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her hand shaking as she zipped up Lily's jacket. "If I miss my shift tomorrow—" "You just retired, Sarah," Robert said. Suddenly, a heavy pounding shook the door. "Bang! Bang! Bang!" Sarah screamed, clapping a hand over her mouth. Lily started to cry. "Open up! Parole check!" The voice was deep, gravelly, and aggressive. "It's Miller," Sarah hissed, her eyes wide with terror. How did he know? Gavin must have called him. "Open the damned door, Jenkins. We know you have a man in there," Miller shouted. "That's a violation of Code 4. No unauthorized overnight guests." Robert moved away from the window. He checked his watch. 6 minutes until David arrived. He looked at the door, which was buckling under the force of Miller's shoulder. "Sarah, take Lily and go into the bathroom. Lock the door," Robert ordered. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a chat with Officer Miller." Sarah grabbed Lily and ran into the tiny bathroom, slamming the door shut. Robert stood in the center of the room, took a deep breath, and unzipped his oversized army jacket, revealing the tailored shirt underneath, a small symbolic shedding of his disguise. The apartment door splintered and flew open. 2 men burst in. One was wearing a police uniform, Officer Miller. He was a heavy-set man with a mustache and eyes that looked like dull stones. The other man was Gavin Thorne. Gavin was holding a baseball bat. "Well, well," Gavin sneered, stepping into the dim room. "I knew it. The drifter. I saw you leave the diner, Ray. You think you can swoop in and touch my property?" Robert stood perfectly still, his hands relaxed at his sides. "She isn't property, Gavin. And this ends tonight." Miller laughed, his hand resting on his holster. "Listen to the bum, Gavin. He thinks he's a hero. You know what we do to heroes in this neighborhood?" "You're trespassing, Ray," Gavin said, slapping the bat into his palm. "And Sarah is in violation of her parole. We're just here to enforce the rules." "The rule of law?" Robert asked, his voice calm. "Or the rule of greed? I've seen the lease, Gavin. I know about the kickbacks. I know about the extortion." Gavin's face darkened. "You know too much for a guy who eats meatloaf alone." He took a step forward, raising the bat. "Miller, arrest this piece of trash for assaulting a business owner. I'll bruise him up a bit first." Miller smirked and pulled out his handcuffs. "Turn around, dirtbag." Robert didn't move. He stared straight at Gavin. "Before you swing that bat, Gavin, you should know something. My name isn't Ray." Gavin paused. "I don't care what your name is." "My name," Robert said, his voice rising, commanding the room, "is Robert Sterling. I own Sterling Hospitality. I own the diner you manage. I own the land this building sits on. And as of right now, I own you." Silence hung in the room for a heartbeat. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then Gavin burst out laughing. It was a loud, raucous cackle. "You! The CEO! Look at you! You look like you slept in a gutter." "Nice try, pal. Miller, cuff him." Gavin swung the bat. He aimed for Robert's ribs, a brutal swing meant to incapacitate. But Robert wasn't just a CEO. Before he was a billionaire, Robert Sterling had served 4 years in the Rangers. Instincts that had been dormant for a decade flared to life. Robert sidestepped the swing with fluid precision. As the bat whooshed through the empty air, Robert stepped in. He drove a hard elbow into Gavin's solar plexus. Oof! Gavin doubled over, dropping the bat, gasping for air. Miller shouted, "Hey!" and drew his taser, pointing it at Robert's chest. "Get on the ground, now!" The red dot of the taser danced on Robert's chest. "Do it!" Robert challenged. "Tase me! But you might want to look out the window first." Miller hesitated. The sound of tires screeching outside cut through the tension. Multiple doors slammed. Heavy boots pounded up the stairs. Fast, disciplined, numerous. "Police!" a voice shouted from the hallway, but it wasn't Miller's backup. "Federal agents! Drop the weapon!" Miller's eyes went wide. "Feds?" The door to the apartment was kicked completely off its hinges this time. 4 men in tactical gear stormed the room, assault rifles raised. Leading them was David, wearing a suit, holding a badge high. "Drop it, Miller," David roared, "or I will drop you." Miller dropped the taser as if it were burning hot. He raised his hands, his face draining of color. Gavin, still wheezing on the floor, looked up with terror. What is this?" Robert straightened his jacket. He looked down at his manager with cold contempt. "I told you, Gavin. I'm the owner." David holstered his weapon and nodded to his team. 2 agents grabbed Miller, slamming him against the wall to cuff him. 2 others hauled Gavin up, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "Robert," David said, stepping forward. "You hurt?" "I'm fine," Robert said. "But we need a medic. Now." He pointed to the bathroom door. Robert walked to the bathroom and tapped gently. "Sarah? It's safe now. You can come out." The door creaked open. Sarah peeked out, holding Lily tight. Her eyes went from the tactical team to the handcuffed Gavin, and finally to Robert. "Ray," she whispered. "Robert," he corrected gently. "My name is Robert, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again." As the agents dragged a screaming Gavin out of the room. "You can't do this! I have rights! It's a misunderstanding!" Sarah walked slowly toward Robert. She looked at the chaos, the power this man commanded, and then she looked at his face. The kindness was still there. You're really the owner?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am," Robert said, "and I have a lot of apologies to make. But first, let's get that hand fixed." He guided her toward the door, past the stunned neighbors peeking out into the hallway. But as they reached the stairwell, David stopped them. He had his phone to his ear, his expression grim. "Robert, hold on," David said. "What is it? We need to get her to the hospital." "We just raided Gavin's office at the diner," David said, lowering the phone. "We found his ledger. Robert, this is bigger than a rental scam. Gavin wasn't just taking their money." "What do you mean?" "The ledger lists shipments," David said darkly. "He was selling their information, social security numbers, identities, and for the ones who couldn't pay the rent. He was selling them." Robert froze. He looked at Sarah. "Trafficking?" Robert breathed. "He had a buyer lined up for Subject SJ, scheduled for Friday," David said quietly. "Sarah Jenkins." Sarah let out a choked sob and collapsed. Robert caught her before she hit the floor. He held her up, his face hardening into a mask of pure fury. Friday. 2 days from now. If he hadn't come into the diner tonight, if he hadn't dropped that fork, Sarah wouldn't have just been fired. She would have vanished. "David," Robert said, his voice terrifyingly low, "cancel my meetings for tomorrow." "What are you planning, sir?" "Gavin is just the middleman," Robert said, staring into the darkness of the stairwell. "I want the buyer, and I'm going to use myself as the bait." The interrogation room wasn't at the police station. It was in a private, soundproofed conference room at the Sterling Hospitality headquarters in downtown Seattle. The luxury of the glass-walled building contrasted sharply with the bruised, zip-tied man sitting in the center of the room. Gavin Thorne was no longer the imposing tyrant of the diner kitchen. Stripped of his manager's shirt and his petty authority, he looked small, sweaty, pathetic. Robert Sterling stood on the other side of the mahogany table. He had showered and changed into a charcoal grey suit, the uniform of his true station. He didn't yell. He didn't pound the table. He simply read through the leather-bound ledger David had recovered from the diner safe. "Page 4, Robert said, his voice calm and clinical. "Emily S., sold to a private staffing agency in Portland. Disappeared in 2022. Page 9. Jessica T. listed as relocated. Never seen again." Robert closed the book with a soft thud. He looked at Gavin. "You weren't running a restaurant, Gavin. You were running a farm. You found vulnerable women, single mothers, parolees, desperate souls, and you harvested them. I didn't know what happened to them," Gavin stammered, sweat dripping off his nose. "I just passed them off to the broker. He said he got them domestic work. Maids! Nannies!" "Don't lie to me," Robert said, leaning forward. "You noted physical condition and compliance levels in the margins. You knew exactly what this was." David, the head of security, stepped forward from the corner. "The feds are ready to book him, Robert. We have enough to put him away for 3 life sentences." "Not yet," Robert said, holding up a hand. He picked up Gavin's confiscated cell phone. It had been buzzing incessantly for the last hour. "The buyer, this broker, is texting. He wants to know if the package is ready for Friday. That's Sarah." Gavin's eyes widened. "If I don't reply, he'll know something is wrong. He'll disappear. You'll never catch him." "Exactly," Robert said. He slid the phone across the table. "Unlock it." "What?" "Unlock it. You're going to confirm the meeting, but you're going to move the timeline up. Tell him you need the cash tonight. Tell him the girl is getting flighty, and you need to offload her immediately." Gavin shook his head frantically. "No way. The broker. He's cartel-level dangerous. If he finds out I set him up, he won't just kill me. He'll torture me." Robert walked around the table and crouched down so he was eye level with Gavin. His voice dropped to a whisper, colder than the Seattle rain. "Gavin, look at me. You are currently facing federal trafficking charges. Your only card to play, the only thing that might keep you off death row and get you into protective custody, is giving us the broker. If you don't help me, I will hand this phone to the FBI. They will book you, and when the broker finds out you got arrested, he'll send someone to your cell anyway. I'm your only chance at survival." Gavin trembled. He looked at the phone, then at Robert's steel-grey eyes. With a shaking finger, he punched in the passcode. "Type what I say," Robert commanded. "Iuto, Iso, AM." The Seattle docks. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, masking the sound of the tactical team moving into position. Robert sat in the back of a black surveillance van parked behind a stack of shipping containers, watching a bank of monitors. Next to him sat Special Agent Miller, no relation to the corrupt officer, the FBI liaison for the case. "Agent strictly advised you to stay back at headquarters, Mr. Sterling," the agent said, adjusting his headset. "This is a volatile situation." "I have a vested interest in the outcome," Robert replied, his eyes glued to the screen, "and my team is providing the bait." On the screen, a lone figure stood under a flickering halogen street lamp near Dock 4. It looked like Sarah. She was wearing the diner uniform, her arm in a sling, her head bowed in submission. But it wasn't Sarah. It was Maria, a former Mossad agent who now worked for Sterling Security. She had the same build, the same hair color, and she was currently armed with a concealed Glock and a wire. "Target approaching," David's voice crackled over the radio. "Black Lincoln Navigator, north entrance." Robert's heart rate spiked. This was it. On the screen, the luxury SUV rolled slowly onto the wet pavement. It stopped 20 feet from Maria. The headlights cut through the rain, blinding her. The rear door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a banker. He wore a beige trench coat, rimless glasses, and held a black umbrella. He walked with an air of casual arrogance. This was the broker. "Turn up the audio," Robert commanded. The van filled with the sound of the rain and the broker's voice, picked up by Maria's wire. "You're not Gavin," the broker said, stopping 10 feet away. His voice was smooth, cultured. "Gavin is sick," Maria said, mimicking Sarah's trembling voice perfectly. He told me to come meet you. He said you have a job for me." A housekeeping job? The broker smiled. It was a reptile's smile. Something like that, my dear. Did he give you the paperwork? He said you have the money for my debt, Maria said. Always about the money, the broker sighed. He reached into his coat pocket. He's reaching, the FBI agent in the van shouted. Snipers, green light if a weapon shows. But the broker didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a thick white envelope. He took a step closer to Maria, inspecting her. He reached out a hand to touch her chin, to lift her face to the light. A bit old, the broker muttered, tilting her head. And damaged goods with that arm. But the client isn't picky. Robert felt a wave of nausea. He gripped the edge of the console. Client. Do we have a deal? The broker asked. You get in the car, the debt is cleared. Yes, Maria whispered. Good. The broker turned to the open door of the SUV. Get in. Now, Robert yelled, though the FBI commander had already given the order. Boom! A flashbang grenade detonated near the SUV, blinding the broker and his driver. Federal agents, get on the ground! Floodlights from the tops of the shipping containers blazed to life, turning night into day. 2 armored FBI trucks screeched around the corners, boxing the Lincoln in. The broker reached for his belt, pulling a small silver pistol. Maria moved faster than humanly possible. She slapped the gun out of his hand, spun him around, and swept his legs. The broker hit the wet asphalt face first. Secure! Maria shouted, her knee on the broker's back. Robert let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 2 days. He watched as the agent swarmed the car, dragging out the driver and handcuffing the man in the trench coat. We got him, the FBI agent said, clapping Robert on the shoulder. Nice work, Mr. Sterling. But now comes the hard part. What's that? Robert asked, cleaning up the mess he left behind. The private room at St. Jude's Medical Center was quiet, smelling of lavender and sanitized linen, a far cry from the antiseptic stench of the public ER. Sarah lay in the bed, her left arm elevated and encased in a complex external fixator. The surgeons had spent 6 hours reconstructing the crushed bones in her wrist and hand. She was sedated, but awake, staring out the window at the city skyline. In the corner of the room, on a plush pull-out sofa, Lily was sound asleep, clutching a new teddy bear that still had the tag on it. There was a soft knock at the door. Sarah turned, fear flashing in her eyes for a split second before she recognized the visitor. Robert Sterling walked in. He wasn't wearing the Ray disguise, and he wasn't wearing the power suit. He was wearing jeans and a soft sweater, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Can I come in? He asked gently. Mr. Sterling. Sarah tried to sit up, wincing. Please lay back, Robert said quickly, setting the cups down and adjusting her pillows. The doctor said you need absolute stillness for that bone graft to heal. Sarah settled back. She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. The nurses. They said I'm in the VIP wing. They said everything is paid for. The surgery, the room, even Lily's checkup. It's the least I could do, Robert said, sitting in the chair next to the bed. Under my watch, my employees were being hurt. I failed you, Sarah. I'm sorry. Sarah shook her head. You saved my life. David told me about the man at the docks, about what was going to happen on Friday. She shuddered, a sob escaping her throat. I was just going to disappear, wasn't I? You were, Robert admitted, his voice grave. But that man is in federal custody. Gavin is in custody. Officer Miller is in custody. The entire ring has been dismantled. But, Sarah looked at her cast. I can't work. I have nowhere to go. My apartment is a crime scene. I have no money. And with my record... We need to talk about that, Robert said. He reached into a folder he had brought with him. I can't accept charity, Sarah said, her pride flaring up even through the pain. "I can work. Once this heals, I can bus tables with one hand. I'll pay you back for the hospital bills." "Sarah, stop," Robert said softly. "This isn't charity. It's restitution." He pulled out a document and handed it to her. "What is this?" "First," Robert pointed to the top paper, "this is a letter from the district attorney. Due to your cooperation in exposing a major trafficking ring and the coercion under which you were living, your parole has been terminated early. You are a free woman, Sarah. No more Officer Miller. No more restrictions." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I'm free?" "Completely," Robert said. "But that leaves the issue of employment and housing." He flipped to the next page. "I fired everyone at the diner," Robert stated matter-of-factly. "The management was complicit, and the staff turned a blind eye. I'm shutting Unit 402 down for 3 months for a complete remodel. When it reopens, it will be a flagship training center for the Sterling chain." He looked her in the eye. "I need a manager, Sarah. Someone who knows the operations, someone who knows the struggles of the staff, and someone who possesses an unshakable moral compass. Someone who stood between a monster and her child and didn't break." Sarah stared at him. "You want me to be the manager?" "I want you to run the training program," Robert corrected. "I want you to teach new hires not just how to pour coffee, but how to look out for each other. The salary is $85,000 a year, plus full benefits for you and Lily." Sarah started to cry. Not the terrified, silent weeping of the diner, but loud, heaving sobs of relief. "I don't know what to say," she choked out. "Say yes," Robert said, smiling. "But there's one more thing." He pulled out a set of keys. "Sterling Hospitality owns a residential complex in Queen Anne. It's for visiting executives, but we have an empty 2-bedroom unit on the ground floor. It has a garden. I think Lily would like a garden." Sarah looked at the keys, then at her sleeping daughter, and finally back at Robert. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing all this for a waitress who dropped a fork?" Robert stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain, which finally seemed to be clearing up. "Because," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. 10 years ago, before I built this company, I was living in my car. I broke my leg on a job site, and my boss fired me. I thought it was the end, but a stranger bought me a meal and paid for a motel room for a week. That 1 week gave me enough time to heal and find a new path." He turned back to her. "He never let me pay him back. He just told me to pass it on. I'm just settling my debt, Sarah." He walked to the door. "Rest now. The moving truck comes on Tuesday." As the door clicked shut, Sarah Jenkins looked down at her bandaged hand, then at the keys in her lap. For the first time in 5 years, the pain in her wrist didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a battle scar, and the future didn't look like a dark tunnel anymore. It looked like a garden. 6 months later, the rain in Seattle was still falling, but inside the building on the corner of 4th and Pine, everything was different. The neon sign no longer flickered. It hummed with a steady, warm, golden light, reading the Sterling Griddle Training Center. Inside, the smell of stale grease was gone, replaced by the aroma of freshly ground Arabica beans and baking sourdough. The walls were painted a soft, welcoming sage green. The kitchen, visible through a pristine glass partition, was a hive of disciplined, cheerful activity. Robert Sterling walked through the front door. This time, he wasn't wearing an army jacket or a fake beard. He was wearing a navy suit, and he walked with the pride of a man seeing his vision realized. He didn't need to look for a table. The hostess, a young college student named Jenny, greeted him immediately with a genuine smile. not the terrified grimace he had seen on the staff half a year ago. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Sarah is in the back reviewing the inventory logs. Shall I get her?" "No need, Jenny." Robert smiled. "I'll wait." He sat in booth 4, the same booth where he had first seen a broken woman drop a fork. A few moments later, the kitchen doors swung open. Sarah Jenkins walked out. She looked like a different person. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by a healthy glow. She wore a tailored manager's blazer over her uniform. But the most striking change was her left hand. The cast was long gone. In its place was a faint, surgical scar running along her wrist, a silver line of history. She carried a tray of coffees with that left hand, her grip steady, strong, and confident. She set the coffee down in front of Robert. "Black, no sugar," she said, her eyes crinkling with a smile. "And I promise not to spill it this time." Robert laughed, taking the mug. "You look good, Sarah. How's the hand?" 95%, she said, flexing her fingers. "The physical therapy is brutal, but it works." "And Lily?" "She just made the honor roll at her new school. She has her own room, Robert. She painted it yellow. She calls it her sunshine room." Robert nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. "And the business?" Sarah's expression turned serious, professional. "Profitability is up 40% since the reopen. Staff retention is 100%. But more importantly, the training program works. We had a girl come in last week, fleeing a domestic violence situation. We didn't just give her a job, we connected her with the legal team you put on retainer. She's safe now." "That's what I wanted to hear," Robert said. "By the way," Sarah lowered her voice, "I saw the news this morning." Robert knew what she was referring to. The trial had ended yesterday. "Gavin Thorne received 30 years, Robert said quietly. "Officer Miller got 15, and the broker. He won't be seeing daylight ever again. The federal seize on their assets is what's funding the new scholarship program for employees' children." Sarah looked out the window at the busy street. "Justice is a strange feeling," she mused. "I spent so long being afraid of them. Now they're just gone. And I'm still here." "You're more than just here, Sarah," Robert said. "You're leading." As they talked, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. A young busboy, new to the job, had dropped a stack of heavy ceramic plates. They shattered loudly against the tile floor. The boy froze, his face draining of color, terrifyingly reminiscent of Sarah 6 months ago. He hunched his shoulders, waiting for the screaming, waiting for the abuse. The diner went silent. Sarah stood up. She walked over to the boy. Robert watched, his breath caught in his throat. Sarah didn't yell. She didn't scowl. She knelt down on the floor next to the terrified boy, minding the shards of glass. "Hey," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying through the quiet room. "Are you hurt? Did any glass cut you?" The boy shook his head, trembling. "I'm sorry, Miss Jenkins. I'll pay for them. Please don't fire me." Sarah reached out with her scarred left hand and gently rested it on the boy's shoulder. "It's just plates, Michael," she said firmly. "Plates can be replaced. People can't. Take a deep breath. We'll clean this up together." She grabbed a dustpan and began to help him sweep. Robert Sterling watched from booth 4, a lump forming in his throat. He had come to the diner 6 months ago, looking for lost profits. He had found corruption, violence, and despair. But as he watched Sarah Jenkins teach a young man that mistakes were not fatal, he realized he had found something else. He had found the true value of his company. He finished his coffee, left a $100 bill on the table, and walked out into the rain. He didn't need to worry about Unit 402 anymore. It was in the best hands possible. Robert Sterling proved that true leadership isn't about the power you hold over people. It's about the power you empower them with. He used his billions not to buy silence, but to buy freedom for a woman who had lost all hope. Sarah's scar on her wrist became a symbol, not of what was broken, but of how she healed stronger than before. This story reminds us that you never truly know what someone is going through behind a smile or a uniform. A dropped fork might just be clumsiness, or it might be a silent scream for help. Be kind. Be observant. And if you have the power to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves, be brave enough to do it. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button. It helps us share these important messages with more people. And if you want more stories about justice, redemption, and the hidden heroes among us, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to know, have you ever had a boss or stranger change your life when you were at your lowest? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.